Welcome to our Scary Stories, the podcast where we explore the terrifying world of the unknown. In this episode, we delve beyond our veil of reality and into the realm of the dead, where restless spirits roam and ghostly apparitions haunt the living. Join us on a journey through the chilling tales of the afterlife, where we'll encounter vengeful specters, malevolent entities, and the terrifying unknown. So, sit back, turn off the lights, and prepare yourself for a journey into the darkness. Our first story of the night is titled The Old Marred Mansion. The old mansion loomed on the edge of town, its once majestic facade now marred by years of neglect. When the Wilson family moved in, they thought they had found their dream home. But as the days passed, they soon realized that they were not alone in the house. The Wilson family of four was a tight-knit bunch. James, the father, was a driven businessman who had always dreamt of owning a grand old house. His wife, Lisa, was a spirited artist, always eager to try something new. Lily, their precocious 8-year-old daughter, loved exploring every nook and cranny of their new, sprawling mansion. And then there was Jack, their teenage son, who was always lost in thought and struggled to fit in with his peers. Despite their differences, they were a loving family and excited to start their new chapter in their dream home. At first, the family laughed off the strange noises and unexplained occurrences in the house. But as the hauntings grew more intense, they found themselves becoming increasingly unsettled. They would hear footsteps in the hallways, doors would slam shut on their own, and objects would move inexplicably. As the days went by, the hauntings in the house only intensified, and the family found themselves trapped in a living nightmare. They would often hear strange and disturbing whispers in the night, their voices barely audible but chilling to the bone. At times, they would even see shadowy figures moving in the darkness, their silhouettes shifting and contorting in unnatural ways. The atmosphere was thick with a sense of malevolence, and it felt as though they were under siege by an unknown force. As the hauntings grew more frequent and terrifying, James and Lisa's relationship began to deteriorate. They were both becoming increasingly erratic and paranoid, and they would often argue late into the night about the things they were seeing and hearing. Neither of them felt safe in their own home anymore, and their sense of reality was beginning to fray at the edges. Even during the day, the family was haunted by a sense of dread and unease. They would feel as though they were being watched, and the slightest sound would make them jump. The children's grades began to suffer, and they would often have nightmares about the shadowy figures that lurked in the corners of their room at night. No matter what they did, they couldn't seem to escape the grip of the malevolent presence in their home. They tried blessing the house, bringing in paranormal investigators, and even contacting a priest to perform an exorcism, but nothing seemed to work. The hauntings only grew stronger, and the family was pushed to the brink of their sanity. It wasn't until they stumbled upon an old newspaper article in the basement that the Wilsons learned the truth. The previous owners of the mansion, a wealthy family of 5, had been brutally murdered in their sleep by an unknown assailant. The killer had never been caught, and the mansion had stood empty ever since, haunted by the restless spirits of its former occupants. As the Wilsons continued to investigate, they began to feel the vengeful presence of the ghosts growing stronger. They would hear crying coming from the empty rooms, and footsteps echoing in the hallways. Lily claimed that she had seen a ghostly figure staring at her through the window at night, and Jack reported feeling as though he was being watched constantly. The hauntings reached a crescendo one fateful night. The Wilsons were huddled in their living room, watching a movie together, when the house suddenly began to shake violently. At first, they thought it was an earthquake, but the shaking continued to grow stronger and more intense. Plates and glasses flew off the shelves, shattering on the ground. Furniture toppled over, crashing into walls and floors. The family huddled together in terror, trying to stay upright as the shaking threatened to throw them off balance. "What's happening?" Lily screamed, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know," James yelled over the chaos. "We need to get out of here, though." The family scrambled to their feet, trying to find their way through the darkness as the house shook and rattled around them. They could hear the sounds of breaking glass and splintering wood, and the air was thick with the smell of dust and debris. The walls creaked and groaned, and it felt as though the whole house was about to collapse in on itself. "Jack, Lily," Lisa cried, struggling to keep up with the others. "Stay close to us." The family stumbled towards the front door, their hearts pounding with fear and adrenaline. As they burst out onto the front lawn, they saw that the entire house was in a state of chaos. Windows were shattered, and pieces of the roof were falling to the ground. They could hear the sounds of the ghosts laughing and screaming in a state of madness and torment from within the walls. "We have to get as far away from here as possible," James said, his voice shaking with fear. The family sprinted down the street, not daring to look back. They could still hear the sounds of the shaking and crumbling behind them, and it felt as though the ghosts were right on their heels. When they finally reached a safe distance from the house, they collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath. "I can't believe we made it out alive," Lisa said, her voice trembling. "Me neither," James replied, his eyes wide with terror. "We're lucky to be alive." The family sat there in silence, their hearts still pounding with fear and excitement. They knew that they would never forget the terror that they had endured, or the bravery that they had shown in the face of the unknown. The legend of the haunted mansion would live on long after the Wilsons made their escape that terrifying night. Our next story of the night is titled The Road to Redemption. In the quiet town of Millfield, a ghostly figure was said to haunt the streets at night. The locals called her Little Emily, and her tragic story was passed down from generation to generation. According to legend, Emily was a young woman who had been killed in a hit-and-run accident on Dunbar Street on her way home from school. Her ghostly apparition was said to appear near the spot where she had died, and anyone who saw her was said to be cursed with 40 years of bad luck. Dunbar Street was a long, winding road that snaked through the outskirts of town. The houses on either side were small and quaint, with neatly trimmed lawns and white picket fences. At night, the street was dark and deserted, with only a few flickering street lamps to illuminate the way. Emily's ghostly figure was said to be ethereal and almost translucent, with a sad expression on her face. Her long, white dress flowed around her, and her hair was twisted into a tangled knot. Her eyes, filled with sorrow, seemed to look right through you. One night, a group of teenagers decided to investigate the legend of Emily for themselves. They were a curious bunch, always eager for a new thrill. There was Samantha, the confident and outgoing leader of the group, who was always up for a challenge. Her best friend, Michael, was the skeptical one, always looking for a rational explanation for everything. Sarah was the shy one, easily spooked by anything that went bump in the night. And then there was Jake, the joker of the group, who always had a quip ready to lighten the mood. Armed with flashlights and cameras, they set out to find the spot where Emily was said to appear. As they walked down the deserted street, the air grew cooler and the atmosphere fell almost silent. The sound of their footsteps echoed eerily through the darkness. They looked around, feeling like they were being watched, but they couldn't see anyone. "Do you guys feel that?" said Michael, his voice shaking slightly. "Yeah, it's really creepy," replied Sam. "I'm starting to regret coming here," said Sarah, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't worry, Sarah will be fine," said Jake, trying to sound confident. They continued to walk down the street, the tension mounting with every step. Suddenly, they heard a rustling in the bushes. They stopped in their tracks, their hearts pounding with fear. "What was that?" whispered Michael. "I don't know," said Sam, shining her flashlight into the darkness. They waited in silence, listening for any more sounds. But the street was quiet, except for the sound of their fearful breaths. They cautiously continued down the street, the fear in their hearts growing with every step. Suddenly, they saw a figure in the distance, shrouded in mist. As they approached, they realized that it was the ghostly apparition of Emily. The figure glided towards them, her eyes fixed on the teenagers. They tried to run, but their legs felt heavy and unresponsive. They were trapped, caught in the grip of Emily's stare. "Who are you?" Samantha asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I am the spirit of Emily Johnson," the ghostly figure replied. "I have come to tell you my story." The teens were completely captivated by Emily's tragic story. As she spoke, they couldn't help but feel a sense of deep sadness for the young girl who had been so cruelly taken from the world. Emily's ghostly figure shimmered in the dim light, her hair a halo of pale silver, and her eyes brimming with unshed tears. She spoke of her life before her untimely death, describing a girl who had been full of hope and promise. Emily had been a gifted artist and musician with a passion for the beauty of the world. But her success had also attracted the attention of someone who couldn't bear to see her shine. As Emily recounted the events of the night of her death, the teens felt a chill run down their spines. They could almost feel the fear and panic that Emily had felt as she had seen Amanda's car coming towards her. The screech of tires, the blinding headlights, the sickening thud as the car struck her, all of it seemed to play out before their eyes. But what was even more terrifying was the knowledge that Amanda was still out there, somewhere, living her life as though nothing had happened. The teens felt a sense of righteous anger burn within them. They knew that they had to do something to bring Amanda to justice and give Emily the peace that she deserved. The teenagers were all shaken after their encounter with Emily's ghost, and they felt a sense of obligation to help bring closure to her tragic story. They decided to investigate her murder, hoping to uncover the truth and give her the justice she deserved. They started by talking to the older residents of Millfield, hoping to learn more about the history of the town and the circumstances surrounding Emily's death. They found that many people remembered Emily, and her death had deeply affected the community. They were able to piece together the story of the jealous classmate who had taken her life, and they learned more about the events leading up to the tragic hit and run. As they delved deeper into the investigation, the teenagers discovered that Emily's family had never held a proper memorial service for her. They decided to organize one themselves as a way of honoring her memory and bringing closure to her story. The service was held in a small park near the site of Emily's death. The teenagers decorated the park with flowers and candles and invited the entire town to attend. There was a sense of sadness and solemnity in the air as everyone gathered to pay their respects to the young girl who had been taken too soon. The teenagers took turns speaking, sharing different memories they had collected from the community of Emily, and expressing their hopes for justice in her case. They read poems and sang songs, and the park was filled with the sound of quiet weeping and sniffling. As the service came to a close, the teenagers lit a lantern and released it into the night sky, watching as it disappeared into the darkness. The memorial service was a powerful moment of closure for the town of Millfield. It brought the community together in a shared sense of grief and remembrance, and it helped to heal the wounds of the past. For the teenagers who had organized the service, it was a moment of pride and accomplishment, as they realized that they had made a real difference in the lives of the people around them. From that day forward, Emily's ghostly apparition never appeared again, and the curse that had haunted Dunbar Street was lifted. The teens had solved the mystery and brought peace to Emily's restless spirit. Her story became a legend in Millfield, a reminder of the dangers of jealousy and envy, and the power of compassion and forgiveness. This next terrifying tale is titled The Darkness Within the Doll. The serene suburb of Greenfield welcomed a new family of 4 as they moved into their cozy 2-story house with a white picket fence and a charming garden in the front. Mark and Lisa, a happily married couple, along with their 2 young children, Jack and Lily, were excited for a fresh start. Mark's recent promotion to a high-paying job in the city was the perfect opportunity for them to escape the hustle and bustle of city life and settle into the tranquility of the suburbs. The family was eager to create new memories in their new home and make it their own. The house itself was an old colonial-style home, with creaky wooden floors and a musty smell that was common in older homes. But it had character, and the family was happy to make it their own. They spent the first few days unpacking and getting settled, painting the walls, and decorating the rooms. But it wasn't long before they began to notice that something wasn't quite right. At first, it was small things like doors closing on their own, or a feeling of being watched when no one was there. But as the days went by, these occurrences became more and more frequent and more intense. They began to hear strange noises in the middle of the night, and objects would move on their own. The family tried to ignore these occurrences, thinking that they were just the result of their imaginations or the house settling. But it wasn't long before the haunting escalated to terrifying heights. One night, the family awoke to find their daughter's favorite doll moving on its own. The doll's eyes glowed with an eerie red hue, and its voice took on a demonic tone. The doll's head spun around violently, and it began to levitate off the ground. The family was frozen in terror, watching in disbelief as the doll defied the laws of nature. Fearing for their safety, the family sought the help of a renowned paranormal investigator by the name of Dr. Jonathan Michaels. They had heard of his impressive track record in successfully dealing with such cases, and so they reached out to him for help. He arrived at the house the following day, his calm and reassuring demeanor putting the family at ease. Dr. Michaels immediately got to work, setting up cameras and other equipment around the house to capture any paranormal activity that might occur. He asked the family detailed questions about their experiences, what they had seen, and what they had felt. He also examined the doll closely, taking note of any unusual markings or strange occurrences. As he conducted his investigation, he spoke to the family in a calm and comforting manner, reassuring them that he would get to the bottom of what was happening in their home. He explained to them that he had seen many similar cases in the past, and that he had the experience and expertise necessary to deal with the situation. Finally, after conducting a thorough investigation, Dr. Michaels discovered that the doll was possessed by a malevolent demon by the name of Asmodeus. He informed the family that the demon was using the doll as a conduit to enter the physical world, and that it was determined to wreak havoc on their lives. Dr. Michaels went on to explain that the demon had been drawn to the house by a dark energy that had been present there for years. He discovered that a tragic event had taken place in the house before the family had moved in, and that this event had left a residual negative energy that had attracted the demon. Dr. Michaels informed the family that the demon was particularly attached to the little girl's doll because it was a vessel through which Asmodeus could enter the physical world, and that it was using the family's fear and negative energy to grow stronger. More than anything, they needed to perform an exorcism now before the demon could grow any stronger. The night of the exorcism was dark and stormy, with flashes of lightning illuminating the family's home in Greenfield. They all huddled together, their hearts pounding with fear as they prepared for the dangerous ritual. The atmosphere was heavy and tense as the family anxiously awaited Dr. Michael's arrival. Finally, the doorbell rang, and the family breathed a sigh of relief. Dr. Michaels arrived, his calm and reassuring demeanor a welcome sight in the midst of the chaos. He set up his equipment and prepared to perform the exorcism, explaining the process to the family in detail. As the rituals began, the demon fought back with all its power. The room was filled with a deafening roar as the doll writhed and twisted in Dr. Michael's grasp. The family could feel the tension in the air as the demon's presence grew stronger with every passing moment. Lightning flashed outside, and the thunder roared, as if the very elements themselves were fighting against them. "Keep your faith," Dr. Michaels shouted above the noise. "The demon is fighting back, but we can't let it win." The family gripped each other tightly, their eyes locked on the battle between the demon and Dr. Michaels. The rituals grew more intense as Dr. Michaels poured holy water over the doll and chanted incantations in a language the family didn't recognize. Suddenly, the demon spoke, its voice like nails on a chalkboard. "You cannot defeat me," it hissed. "I am Asmodeus, and I will destroy you all." Dr. Michaels didn't flinch. "You have no power here," he said firmly. "You are a parasite, feeding off the negative energy of this family. But your reign of terror ends tonight." The demon screamed in rage, and the doll flew out of Dr. Michaels' grasp, smashing into the wall. The family gasped in horror, but Dr. Michaels remained steadfast. He continued with the rituals, pouring more holy water on the doll and reciting more incantations. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the demon's hold on the doll was broken. The doll fell lifelessly to the ground, and the room was filled with a sense of relief. The family hugged each other tightly, grateful that the nightmare was finally over. Dr. Michaels smiled, his eyes filled with pride. "You did it," he said to the family. "You were brave, and you never gave up. The demon has been defeated, and you can finally start your new life in peace." The storm outside began to calm, and the lightning grew less frequent. The family breathed a sigh of relief as the darkness lifted, and a new dawn began to break. They knew that they would never forget this night, but they also knew that they had overcome their fear and emerged victorious. The experience had left the family traumatized, but also with a newfound appreciation for the unknown forces that existed in the world. They learned that sometimes the things we cannot see are the most powerful and dangerous. And our final scary story of the night is titled The Escape from Round Lake. The forest behind Round Lake had a dark and sinister reputation that had been passed down from generation to generation. The stories that circulated were terrifying. It was said that the forest was a place where the living became trapped forever, tormented by the malevolent forces that lurked within. The whispers and footsteps that echoed through the trees were the voices of the lost souls who had fallen victim to the forest's evil intent. Despite the rumors, two couples, Mike and Jennifer James, and Pamela and Robert Michaels, were determined to explore the forest's mysteries. They set out on a bright and sunny day, their backpacks filled with supplies, and their hearts filled with excitement. They were confident in their abilities and eager to uncover the secrets of the forest. As the two couples entered the forest, they couldn't help but feel the eerie atmosphere that surrounded them. The air grew colder, and the trees towered over them, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch out forever. As they walked deeper into the forest, the silence was palpable, and the only sound that could be heard was the rustling of leaves underfoot. Jennifer shuddered and whispered, "This place gives me the creeps. I've heard all kinds of rumors about this forest. They say that people who enter never come out." Pamela nodded in agreement. "I heard that the forest is haunted by the ghosts of those who died here. Some say that they are trapped in this forest forever, doomed to wander its dark and twisting paths." Robert scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous. There's no such thing as ghosts. It's just an old legend that people used to scare others." But even as he spoke, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, hiding in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As they continued walking, the forest seemed to grow darker and more menacing. The branches of the trees twisted and turned, creating an almost sinister atmosphere. The silence was so heavy that they could hear the beating of their own hearts. Suddenly, they heard a whisper, soft at first, but growing louder with each passing moment. It was as if the forest itself was speaking to them, trying to tell them to leave before it was too late. Mike's voice quavered as he spoke. "Do you hear that? It sounds like someone's whispering. Maybe we should go back." But before they could turn back, they saw a figure in the distance, a ghostly apparition that seemed to float above the ground. The figure beckoned them forward, and they knew that they had to keep moving if they wanted to escape. As day turned to night, the forest became even more menacing. The shadows grew longer, and the trees loomed overhead like a dark, foreboding presence. The group became disoriented and lost, their sense of direction skewed by the maze of trees and bushes that surrounded them. The whispers and footsteps that they had heard earlier became more frequent and more sinister. The group's nerves were frayed, and they began to argue, blaming each other for getting them lost in the forest. They tried to backtrack, but the forest seemed to shift and change around them, leading them deeper into its dark heart. As they stumbled through the darkness, they came upon a clearing. In the center of the clearing was a small cabin, its windows boarded up, and its roof sagging. The group approached the cabin, hoping to find shelter for the night, but as they drew closer, they saw that the cabin was surrounded by ghostly figures. The figures were clad in ragged clothing, and their eyes glowed with a sinister light. The group froze, unsure of what to do, and then they heard the screams. The screams echoed through the forest, a cacophony of terror and agony. The group turned and ran, their fear giving them renewed energy. The ghosts that appeared before them were truly terrifying. They had hollow eyes that seemed to glow with a ghastly light, and their faces were twisted in agony and despair. Some were missing limbs or had gaping wounds that oozed an eerie black substance. Others seemed to be made entirely of mist or shadow, their forms shifting and changing as they moved. The group could feel their icy breath on their necks, and they could hear their ghostly whispers, promising to keep them in the forest forever. As they ran, their fear grew stronger, and their desperation grew more intense. They stumbled over roots and rocks, crashing through bushes and brambles in their haste to escape. Ghostly figures appeared behind almost every tree, trying to trap them forever in the woods. Their screams echoed through the forest, mixing with the howling of the wind and the creaking of the trees. Jennifer and Pamela clung to their husbands, tears streaming down their faces as they begged for a way out. Mike and Robert tried to stay calm, but even they were trembling with fear. They knew that they had to keep moving, that they had to find a way out of the forest, or they would be lost forever. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they stumbled into a clearing. The moon shone down on them, casting a pale light over the forest floor. They could hear the laughter of the ghosts behind them, but they could see nothing in the darkness. They collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath, grateful for the moment of respite. But even as they caught their breath, they knew that the forest was not done with them yet. They could feel the eyes of the ghosts watching them, waiting for them to make a wrong move. They knew that they had to keep moving, to keep pushing forward, or they would never escape the forest's grasp. With renewed determination, they rose to their feet and set out once more, their eyes fixed on the distant light of the moon. They ran as fast as they could, crashing through the underbrush, dodging the trees, and avoiding the ghosts that still lurked in the shadows. Finally, after what felt like hours, they burst out of the forest and into the open air. The moon shone down on them, and they could hear the sounds of civilization in the distance. They collapsed on the ground once more, weeping with relief and joy. They knew that they had escaped the forest's grasp, but they also knew that they would never forget the horrors that they had seen in the haunted forest behind Round Lake. Thank you for joining us on our Scary Stories, where we ventured beyond the veil and explored the realm of the dead. We hope you enjoyed these spine-chilling tales of the supernatural and the unknown. As we conclude this episode, we encourage you to remember that there are many things in this world that we cannot explain, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. Ghosts, spirits, and otherworldly entities may seem far-fetched, but they have been a part of human culture and folklore for centuries. Whether you believe in the paranormal or not, there's no denying that these stories have an undeniable power to frighten and captivate us. We hope that you have enjoyed this journey into the realm of the dead, and that you'll join us again for more terrifying tales on our Scary Stories.